This is Duke University.
Where I want to start really is to introduce the commonalities between our two panelists today, and then explore also their differences in the conversations that emerge. So both Pierce Freelon and Ingrid LaFleur are artists, although in different capacities. He's a musician, she's a visual artist primarily. They are social activists, liberators of Black bodies, and they work in various different ways in their communities through the moving image and through music. So I just want to start maybe by a definition of Afrofuturism, where you encountered it first, and then we'll talk about your choice to implement it as a, in the sphere of politics and economics. So.
Please.
Men first.
Okay. I'll take it. Hey everyone. Oh, so many friends in the building. Well, when I think about Afrofuturism, I was introduced to this concept of Sankofa by my grandmother. It's an Adinkra symbol of a bird moving forward and looking backward, and reflects kind of an African-centered view of time as nonlinear but cyclical, with kind of forward movement, backward reflection, and presence. And for me, Afrofuturism is very much rooted in that cyclical temporality. And when I was putting the campaign together with kind of aligning principles with the lessons that I've learned from our ancestors, especially like right here in North Carolina, I was really moved by, you mentioned Afrofuturism being connected to art and artists. One of my mentors and just an incredible visionary and change shaper here in North Carolina was Dr. Maya Angelou. And she had a poem called A Pledge to Our Youth, where she talks about things that she wanted to elders and folks with Black liberation as a priority, as a not just goals, but as a part of their purpose. She has a poem where she calls for clean and well-furnished schools, safe and non-threatening streets, employment which makes use of our talents but does not degrade your dignity. And in that moment, she was projecting, she was predicting, it's the beginning process of manifesting a future where those things are real. Afrofuturism, like clean and well-furnished schools. We need to get there. How do we do it? What policies do we need to put in place in order to make that manifest for our kids? Safe and non-threatening streets. There's a great community organization here in Durham called Spirit House, which runs a program called the Harm-Free Zone, and Mama Nia, who runs Spirit House, has this great workshop that she does where she talks about, close your eyes and imagine what it feels like to be safe. And what the city funds as it relates to public safety, a lot of it is policing, which is not what comes to a lot of people's mind when they think about safety. They think about home, they think about family, they think about grandma, and how can we create a public safety policy that is a reflection of that version of safety, as opposed to a version that's about, kind of policing. When I think of, different folks, elders who've inspired me to kind of manifest the Black liberation kind of vision that they put forth through their art, and I see community organizing and activism as a form of art, as a creative work. It's Afrofuturists like Harriet Tubman and Maya Angelou and Nina Simone that really kind of guide my thinking.
Afrofuturism is a way of talking about the Black experience using speculative modalities like science fiction, fantasy, magical realism. We look at African and African diasporic spiritual practices, mythologies, legends. We look at the intersection of race and technology, race and science. Really, it's about, as Pierce said, Black liberation, but I believe that collective liberation can only be attained when there is Black liberation. So this is not an exclusionary kind of situation. I've come in contact with so many white men, actually, who are like, I'm seeking liberation through Afrofuturism. So that's fascinating and great. So it's doing the work that we really need, seeing that the world is centered on white hetero men. I think that for me, I came about my campaign in a little different way. I was teaching Afrofuturism to youth, and then I started working within the schools in Detroit, and that's when I learned about youth living without water. And this is before it became super public. Everyone was just focused on the foreclosure, the housing crisis in Detroit. And when that hit, I immediately went into the social justice space and to learn more about what's happening with water shutoffs, and then learning about all the other challenges at the exact same time, which can be overwhelming, as you can understand. And I think that for me, I'm a very impatient person. So if I know there's a logical way to solve an issue, then I'm just like, do it. What are we waiting for? And city government just refuses to stop the water shutoffs. So just to give you some context, Detroit is 85% Black. We're facing a 64% poverty rate if you add the working poor, and our water bill is twice the national average. So it's like, why are you forcing people to pay these high, high water bills when you know that they cannot afford it? Like, you know it for a fact, right? So why would city government do that? And so my campaign really was focused on being human-centered, putting humans first and not politics or the money first. When I first announced, everyone thought it was like a performance. There was no way that it could have been for me. Once you are in intimate contact with a child who is living without water and you see how it affects their emotional and mental state, you're forever changed, and it's your responsibility to do something. If you're a person who can walk away from that like whatever, then you're amazing to me, but I don't know anybody who would. I really wanted to make sure that Detroiters understood all of the different options possible to resolve the issues. So my platform was probably a little risque, I guess, to some people, because I was proposing universal basic income, using cryptocurrency, and all kinds of things that politicians wouldn't want to take a risk on. But I was willing to take that risk because it wasn't about necessarily winning. It was really about creating solutions, sustainable, real solutions. One of the things, first, let me say this, as an Afrofuturist, you embody it, you live it every single day. It's not like you take it off, or I'm only curating it and it's something separate from me. It is me. So, and essentially, automatically, the campaign is Afrofuturist in that way, but I didn't really sit down intentionally and distill principles from Afrofuturism to integrate into my platform. It's only after that I was able to really distill that experience, and then I came up with the principles of Afrofuturism that I talk about now. That I believe it took conversations like these every day with Detroiters to really understand what they want, they desire, what they're envisioning. The enormity of the problems and the complexities of them, for me to really understand how Afrofuturism can really address those things. So it's like I had to campaign in order to get to the point of, what can Afrofuturism do? And so now I guess we'll get to that, but now that's what I'm working in, and I'm continuing that mission. I haven't stopped.
Yesterday, when you were speaking on water, you started with Drexia, with the myth of Drexia, and you start with Maya Angelou and a poet. And I'm just wondering, like, how, when you're implementing and you're talking to politicians, the literature of Afrofuturism, its mythologies, its ancestral bodies, how they translate into political speak.
Like, what have they taught us, right? And what's happening now? So I think most indigenous cultures around the world have a deep regard of the earth, the environment, and the cosmos. But yet, I believe since industrialization we've just been separated from both, and that's why I believe as humans on Earth we're depressed. The ancestors live, I always say, in the earth, in the water, in the cosmos. They're all around us. And so taking that moment to really honor them through policy that really supports and protects the environment, I think is really key.
Do y'all know what happens in a chrysalis? Like the caterpillar, it completely melts down to a goo-like substance so that it can reform and emerge, wings popping. Like, and that to me speaks to, you hear a lot about, especially in the Black radical tradition, like destroy and rebuild. Like, let's come with a new paradigm. Let's shift the paradigm. And there's water even involved in that. But I think about, there's a great Afrofuturist short film called Pumzi, which is about kind of water shortages and how folks are kind of navigating that space. And then about, well, spoiler alert, I'm so sorry if you haven't seen it.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. You got to check it out. But I'm going to reveal the end. There's actually abundance in the film, and you find out that scarcity is completely manufactured. And I think about, like, Mos Def has a song called New World Water, where he ties some of the issues we have in water. Not just in places like Michigan, from Detroit to Flint, but also on the continent of Africa, where there's serious water problems. Most places in the developing world, there are issues around water, access to it. And Mos Def ties that into this narrative about the water being polluted by the ancestors who flung themselves overboard to resist a life in bondage. And I think in that way, our artists have so much to offer us in terms of a narrative around how we got here and a path forward about what we can do next. And when I think about politicians, you're totally right. So many politicians are so worried about their next election or where they're going to get their money from that they're not prepared to do what's required of us in this moment to get where we need to go. And I think that that there's a severe lack of imagination, just imagination, what's possible. And artists, just one more ancestor thing I'll toss in there. When I think about the historical role that story plays in West African culture, there's this griot storyteller, historian, genealogist, poet, artist that was a storyteller. And they were very powerful figures in their societies. They were feared by the leadership and the chiefs and the people kind of with the political and economic and military power, because they spoke the truth and they could rile people up. And we've always been, as human beings, a culture that invests in story. Sorry, I know I said that was the last one, but think of like Birth of a Nation, that crazy KKK white supremacist film that coined the term blockbuster because they were wrapped around the block to watch this film that vilified black men and showed the KKK as the heroes. Like, those stories and that creative masterpiece in many ways, from a cinematography standpoint, influenced the minds and the movements and the policies of their time. So it's about time that we start bringing artists to political spheres and using our imagination to project a future beyond the scope of what we have inherited.
I'm big into solidarity and collectivity, and the question or the conversation that we had about Afrofuturism a week ago, was around why Durham and why Detroit. Like, how does a platform like yours, what does it take for platforms like yours to emerge? Why these cities?
I think for me, I'm building off of already a radical legacy that existed in Detroit for decades, right? And I mean, even learning about the history of free blacks who were living during, slavery time, who were doing really radical things. Like, it's really fascinating that the long legacy that we have there. So it's like in the air, it's in the earth. Detroiters are not quiet. We are not passive aggressive. We speak our mind, and we're not afraid to act on what we want to do. So that level of strength really is what I kind of hold on to even to now. It's what encourages me to do the work that I do. So Detroit, I think, is already an Afrofuturist place. I mean, we gave the key to the city to Sun Ra, a man who said he was from Saturn. Danya Luna is from Detroit, and she said she was from Mars. She's the first black supermodel, or one of the first, in the 60s. The Nation of Islam was born there, and they were talking about spaceships hovering above the city, protecting black people. We're very, I think, on the ground. When you really get into Detroit, there are very much this kind of forward-thinking way of being, and we don't wait for city government to like kind of help us or sanction it or value it in any way, shape, or form. We just do it, and that's what you're seeing, and that's what we're known for. That's the resiliency that calls people from all around the world to kind of witness. So I always believed that I was just one little person reflecting just a whole group of people who have been doing the work for decades. Everything that I spoke on, there have been people working and working and working. So it's never been about, I'm the one who can do. It's more about amplifying that which has already been done, and then maybe bringing some other ideas to that. But I really stay in that humble space of just being a blip on like a huge, wonderful, complex history of Detroit.
Yeah, I love the I love the image that you conjured, talking about all of the Afronauts, from Detroit, and I think Detroit and Durham share some heritage in that sense. I've been thinking, I don't know, maybe a visual artist could help manifest this, but when I think about the platform that we put forward, I couldn't agree with you more. And the image I have in my head, if y'all could visualize with me, is like there's an ancestor with their hand on my shoulder, many ancestors, and there's Baba Chuck Davis, who was the founder of the African American Dance Ensemble. People like Mama Nia from Spirit House, and Omi Sade, Bernie Scott, and Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Their hands are there. And every time I have one of those lean back moments, or I encounter, a Kwanzaa fest where Baba Chuck is sharing his spirit and extending it out into the entire room, and I get to bear witness to that and absorb some of that light. It's there, contained within this vessel that is being charged by the hands of ancestors going back further to Ernie Barnes and Polly Murray, and even further, Black Wall Street. There's just this rich legacy there, and what I try to do with Black Space is to then be a vessel for that, and then to spread that out to the next generation of folks who will come after us to carry that legacy forward even further. I think the one piece that in addition to the elements that you talked about is just like Motown, you know what I mean? Like all of the culture that came out of Detroit, and it's just too many to mention, so many. And I think, similarly here in Durham, just some of the folks that I mentioned, Ernie Barnes, who was like, North Carolina Central graduate and a star NFL football player, but also an artist whose art, graced Marvin Gaye album covers and Good Times, and was political, and Pauli Murray, who was like brilliant scholar and intellectual and a legal lawyer, but also like an Episcopal priest and a poet, and just so many, all the things, so magic. And I think we definitely inherit that legacy, and then we that's the soil. So it doesn't surprise me that a campaign like ours was able to be successful and soil that rich. And it's our job to keep pouring back into the soil to make it fertile for future generations.
Most definitely. Mm-hmm.